At 3 a.m., I heard keys turning in my front door. My blood froze. I wasn't expecting anyone. My husband David was sound asleep next to me, and our 3-month-old baby Emma was finally sleeping through the night in her nursery down the hall. But I knew exactly who it was. And honestly, I'd been preparing for this moment for 6 months. You see, my mother-in-law, Helen Martinez, had been playing a very dangerous game with me. She thought she was smarter, more experienced, more deserving of being the real mother in this house. What she didn't know was that I'm not just any new mom trying to figure things out. I'm a family law attorney who's handled over 200 custody cases. I've seen this playbook before. And when someone threatens to take my child, well, they have no idea what they're dealing with. Let me take you back to where this all started, because the woman creeping through my house right now, she didn't just decide to break in randomly. This has been 6 months in the making. When David and I first got married 2 years ago, Helen seemed like the perfect mother-in-law, always bringing over home-cooked meals, offering to help with wedding planning, constantly telling David how lucky he was to find such a sweet, capable girl. I should have known it was too good to be true. The first red flag came during my pregnancy. Helen started showing up unannounced, letting herself in with the spare key David had given her for emergencies. She'd reorganize my kitchen while I was at work, claiming she was just helping. She'd fold my laundry and put everything in different places, then act confused when I couldn't find anything. "Oh, Sarah, honey," she'd say with that syrupy, sweet voice. "I was just trying to make things easier for you. You're going to be so overwhelmed when the baby comes." Every time I tried to talk to David about it, he'd brush me off. "Mom just wants to help, babe. She raised 3 kids successfully. Maybe we should listen to her experience." No, but here's what David didn't see. When he wasn't around, Helen's mask would slip. She'd make little comments about how I was too career-focused to be a good mother, how I clearly didn't understand family priorities. She'd touch my belly without permission and whisper to my unborn daughter, "Don't worry, sweetie. Grandma knows what's best for you." I started keeping a journal of every incident. As a lawyer, I knew documentation would be crucial if things escalated, and my gut told me they would. After Emma was born, Helen's behavior intensified dramatically. She'd arrive at 7 a.m. on weekends claiming she was just checking on the baby. She'd critique everything from how I held Emma to what I fed her, always with that same condescending tone. "Sarah, sweetheart, that's not how you burp a baby. Here, let me show you the right way." She'd take Emma from my arms before I could protest, leaving me standing there feeling incompetent in my own home. The breaking point came when I installed a nanny cam to monitor our babysitter while I was at work. What I captured instead was Helen, who had been coming over during the day using her key, talking to my sleeping daughter. "Grandma's here, precious girl," she cooed into the camera I knew she couldn't see. "Mommy doesn't know how to take care of you properly, but don't worry. Grandma will teach you everything you need to know. Real mothers don't abandon their babies for work all day." I felt sick watching that footage, but it got worse. "Your mommy thinks she knows everything because she went to some fancy law school," Helen continued, rocking my daughter in the chair I'd carefully positioned next to Emma's crib. "But she doesn't understand that being a mother is about sacrifice, about putting your child first. I'm the real mother in this house, sweetheart. Don't let anyone tell you different." That phrase, "I'm the real mother in this house," it hit me like a physical blow, because I'd heard those exact words before, in my office, from clients whose children had been taken by overzealous grandparents who convinced courts that the biological parents were unfit. I knew Helen's playbook because I'd seen it destroy families, the subtle undermining, the documentation of every perceived failure, the gradual building of a case that the grandparent was more suitable to raise the child. Some of these women were masterful at it, but Helen didn't know who she was dealing with. I called my colleague Rebecca, who specializes in grandparents' rights cases. "Beck, I need you to walk me through the warning signs again, hypothetically." "Sarah, please tell me this isn't about your mother-in-law. Just humor me." "Okay, red flags. unauthorized entry into the home, undermining parental authority, documenting perceived failures, enlisting the adult child against the parent, claims of superior child-rearing knowledge. She paused. Sarah, how many of these boxes is she checking? All of them. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. You need to start building your defense now. Document everything. Change your locks. And Sarah, trust your instincts. You've saved enough families to know when yours is under attack. That night, I sat David down for what I thought would be a serious conversation about boundaries. Instead, it became clear that Helen's manipulation ran deeper than I'd realized. Mom thinks you might be struggling with postpartum depression, David said gently as if he was breaking devastating news. She's noticed you seem anxious, maybe a little paranoid about her visits. She's worried about Emma's well-being. I stared at my husband, this man I'd loved and trusted, and realized Helen had gotten to him first. She'd planted seeds of doubt about my mental health, my fitness as a mother. Classic alienation tactics. David, your mother has been coming into our house without permission, criticizing my parenting, and telling our daughter that she's the real mother here. Sarah, that sounds a little extreme. Mom would never say that. Maybe you're reading too much into things? The gaslighting was textbook perfect. Helen had trained him well. That's when I knew I was on my own in this fight. And that's when I started preparing for war. Over the next month, I quietly began documenting everything. I installed cameras throughout the house that Helen couldn't detect. I researched her background and discovered a pattern. David's previous serious girlfriend had left him suddenly after 2 years together. When I tracked her down through mutual friends, the story she told me was chilling. Helen made my life hell, Jessica told me over coffee. She convinced David I was cheating, that I was irresponsible with money, that I didn't respect family values. By the end, David was questioning everything about me. I couldn't fight both of them. Did she ever mention anything about children? About being a better mother? Jessica's face went pale. She told me once that if David and I ever had kids, she'd make sure they were raised properly. I thought she was just being dramatic, but the way she said it, God, Sarah, please be careful. I left that meeting with absolute clarity about what I was facing. Helen wasn't just an overbearing mother-in-law. She was a woman who had spent David's entire life conditioning him to choose her over anyone else. And now she wanted my daughter. But I had advantages Helen didn't know about. First, I'd been financially independent long before I met David. I had my own accounts, my own property, my own safety nets that she couldn't touch or track. Second, my nanny wasn't just any babysitter. Maria was a licensed social worker I'd met through my custody cases. She understood family dynamics and had been quietly documenting Helen's inappropriate behavior during her unannounced visits. Third, I'd been building a case file that would make any family court judge take notice. Timestamps, recordings, witness statements, expert testimony about parental alienation, everything was admissible and damning. But Helen didn't know any of this. She thought she was dealing with a naive new mother who could be easily manipulated and eventually displaced. She was about to learn otherwise. The final piece of Helen's plan became clear when David sat me down for another concerned conversation 3 weeks ago. Mom thinks it might be good for you to get some help, Sarah. Professional help. Just for a few weeks while you work through these feelings of anxiety and paranoia. And what would happen to Emma during these few weeks? Mom has offered to stay here and take care of her. She raised 3 kids. She knows what she's doing. It would just be temporary until you're feeling more like yourself. There it was. The end game. Get me declared temporarily unfit, move Helen into my house as Emma's primary caregiver, and by the time I recovered from my supposed mental health crisis, the custody arrangement would be so established that changing it would be nearly impossible. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. If I hadn't seen this exact scenario play out in my office dozens of times. That sounds like a thoughtful plan, I told David, watching his relief that I wasn't fighting him. Let me think about it. What I was really thinking about was how to give Helen enough rope to hang herself with. I started playing the part she wanted me to play. I acted more tired, more overwhelmed, more grateful for her help. I let her take over more responsibilities with Emma. I stopped questioning her methods or challenging her authority. Helen ate it up. She started making comments to David about how much improvement she was seeing in my attitude, how I was finally learning to accept guidance. Meanwhile, I was documenting every single boundary violation, every inappropriate comment, every moment where she prioritized her agenda over Emma's actual needs. The breakthrough came when Helen started talking to David about making her presence more official. "Maybe I should have my own key to the house," she suggested during dinner last week. "You know, in case of emergencies. And it might be good if I had some legal standing to make medical decisions for Emma, just while Sarah is getting the help she needs." David nodded along like this made perfect sense. That's when I knew she was about to make her move, and I was ready for her. See, Helen had one fatal flaw in her strategy. She was so confident in her manipulation skills, so sure that I was just another weak daughter-in-law who could be easily controlled, that she was getting careless. She didn't know that I'd changed all the locks in the house 2 weeks ago. David's key still worked, but the spare key Helen had been using? It opened exactly nothing. She didn't know that every room in my house was under surveillance, and that footage was being automatically uploaded to a secure server that only I controlled. And she definitely didn't know that I'd already filed preliminary paperwork for a restraining order, pending one final piece of evidence that would make the case airtight. All I needed was for Helen to overstep one more time, to do something so clearly inappropriate that even David couldn't defend it. So when I heard those keys in my front door at 3 a.m., when I heard Helen's footsteps moving through my house like she owned it, when I heard her whispering to herself about how she was finally going to fix this situation, I knew this was it. This was the moment I'd been preparing for. Helen thought she was launching a surprise attack on a defenseless target. What she was actually doing was walking into a trap that had been 6 months in the making. I grabbed my phone and started recording as I crept toward Emma's nursery. Every step Helen took, every word she whispered, every boundary she crossed was being documented in real time. "Emma, sweetheart, it's Grandma," I heard her coo through the baby monitor. "Grandma's here to save you from this chaos. Your mama doesn't know how to take care of you, but I do. I'm moving in to take proper care of you." I stood in the hallway listening to this woman promise my sleeping daughter that she was going to take over our lives. "Your daddy and I have talked about this, precious girl. Mama needs to go away for a while, get some help for her problems. But don't worry, Grandma will be here. Grandma will be your real mama now." That's when I heard Emma start to cry. And that's when Helen made the mistake that would end this game forever. "Shh, shh, baby girl," Helen whispered, and I could hear movement in the nursery. "Grandma's going to pick you up and take you somewhere safe, somewhere where Mama can't confuse you anymore." She was trying to take my daughter at 3 a.m. without permission, while David and I slept. In legal terms, this was attempted kidnapping. I stepped into the nursery doorway just as Helen was reaching toward Emma's crib, her hands inches from my baby. "Helen," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" She spun around, and for the first time since I'd known her, Helen Martinez looked genuinely shocked. The mask of concerned grandmother slipped completely, and I saw the calculating manipulator underneath. "Sarah, Emma was crying, and I thought I was just trying to help." At 3 a.m., by letting yourself into my house and attempting to remove my daughter from her crib? I wasn't removing her, I was comforting her. You were clearly not responding to her crying, so Helen. My voice cut through her excuses like a blade. "Emma wasn't crying until you entered this room, and I have everything you just said and did recorded on multiple cameras." The color drained from her face. "You should also know that the key you used to enter my house, it's evidence of breaking and entering. Since I changed the locks 2 weeks ago, and never gave you permission to have it copied. Helen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. And Helen? That little speech you just gave my daughter about being her real mama and taking her somewhere safe, that's attempted kidnapping, a felony. You can't prove. Actually, I can prove everything. 6 months of documentation, Helen, professional witnesses, expert testimony, and now, thanks to your little 3 a.m. adventure, criminal charges. That's when David appeared in the doorway, finally awakened by the commotion. What's going on? Mom, what are you doing here? I looked at my husband, this man who had chosen his mother's manipulation over his wife's reality for months, and felt something break inside my chest. David, your mother just broke into our house at 3 a.m. and attempted to take Emma from her crib. She what? Mom, that can't be. Ask her, David. Ask her what she was planning to do with our daughter at 3 a.m. Helen looked between us, and I could see her calculating her next move. Even caught red-handed, she was still trying to figure out how to spin this. I was protecting Emma, she said finally, lifting her chin with defiant pride. Sarah isn't fit to be a mother. She's paranoid, she's hostile, she's clearly suffering from severe postpartum depression. Emma needs stability, and I can provide that. By kidnapping her in the middle of the night, by removing her from a dangerous situation. David looked like he was watching his entire world collapse in real time. Mom, you can't just take someone's baby, even if you believe. David, Helen's voice turned sharp, the sweet grandmother act completely abandoned. You know I'm right about this. You've seen how Sarah acts, how unstable she's become. We talked about this. We agreed Emma would be better off with me. And there it was, the confession that ended everything. You talked about taking my daughter? I asked David, my voice dangerously quiet. Sarah, it wasn't like that. What was it like, David? Because your mother just admitted that you two conspired to remove Emma from my care. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Helen made one last desperate play. Sarah, you're twisting everything. David and I were only thinking about Emma's well-being. You've been so anxious, so paranoid about my visits. Maybe if you got some professional help. The only person here who needs professional help, I said, my attorney voice taking over completely, is the woman who just committed breaking and entering and attempted kidnapping. I pulled out my phone and started dialing. What are you doing? Helen demanded. Calling the police, and then calling my colleague who specializes in restraining orders. Sarah, wait. David stepped forward, but I held up my hand. David, you have a choice to make right now. You can support your wife and daughter, or you can continue enabling your mother's criminal behavior, but this ends tonight. Helen finally seemed to understand that her game was over. The sweet, concerned grandmother mask was completely gone, replaced by cold fury. You have no idea what you're doing, she hissed. David will never choose you over family. Emma needs a real mother, not some career-obsessed. Helen, I interrupted, my voice ice-cold calm. You just broke into my house, attempted to kidnap my child, and confessed to conspiracy with my husband. You don't get to lecture me about being a real mother. The 911 dispatcher answered on the second ring. I need to report a breaking and entering in progress with attempted kidnapping of a minor. As I gave the dispatcher our address, I watched Helen Martinez finally realize that she had played her hand against the wrong woman. I wasn't some naive new mother who could be manipulated and displaced. I was a family law attorney who had been building a case against her for 6 months, and now, thanks to her own arrogance and desperation, I had everything I needed to end her threat to my family permanently. The police were on their way. Helen's game was over. But mine? Mine was just beginning. The police arrived within 7 minutes of my call. As I watched Officer Martinez, ironically sharing Helen's last name, take my statement, I felt a strange mix of vindication and sadness. This wasn't how I'd imagined my marriage would unfold, but sometimes protecting your child means watching your world burn down around you. What Helen didn't know, what David was about to discover, was that I hadn't been playing defense for the past 6 months. I'd been orchestrating the most comprehensive legal trap I'd ever constructed. "Mrs. Martinez," Officer Rodriguez addressed Helen while his partner spoke with David in the living room. "You're under arrest for breaking and entering and attempted kidnapping. You have the right to remain silent." As they read Helen her rights, David looked at me with a mixture of shock and betrayal that might have broken my heart 6 months ago. Now, it just made me tired. "Sarah, did you really have to call the police? Couldn't we have handled this as a family?" That's when my phone buzzed with a text from my colleague Rebecca. "Restraining order approved. Emergency hearing set for 9 a.m. Judge Hartwell is presiding." Judge Patricia Hartwell. I couldn't have asked for a better assignment. She'd seen every variation of family manipulation during her 20-year career and had zero tolerance for grandparents who weaponize their relationships with grandchildren. "David," I said, watching as they led his mother away in handcuffs, "there is no handling this as a family when someone breaks into our house and tries to take our daughter. Your mother just committed serious crimes. But she wasn't actually going to hurt Emma." "How do you know that? How do you know what she was planning to do with a 3-month-old baby at 3 a.m.? David had no answer for that, because for the first time, he was being forced to confront the reality of his mother's behavior instead of the narrative she'd carefully constructed. After the police left, David and I sat in our living room in the kind of silence that feels like the end of everything. Emma had somehow slept through the entire ordeal, which felt like a small miracle. "I need you to understand something," I finally said. "This wasn't random. Your mother has been planning this for months. The comments about my mental health, the suggestions about getting help, the offers to take care of Emma. It was all designed to create a foundation for taking our daughter. That's impossible. Mom would never—" "David, I'm going to show you something, and I need you to watch it all the way through." I pulled up the footage from the nanny cam on my laptop, not just from tonight, but from weeks of Helen's unauthorized visits. The compilation I'd created was devastating. Helen criticizing my parenting to my infant daughter, claiming to be the real mother, discussing her plans to fix the situation. I watched David's face as he absorbed 6 months of evidence that his mother had been systematically undermining his wife and planning to take his child. "Oh, God," he whispered as the footage ended. "Sarah, I had no idea. When she talked to me about you needing help, I thought she was genuinely concerned. I didn't know this was what she meant. David, your mother didn't just manipulate me. She manipulated you, too. This is what she does. She creates chaos and then positions herself as the solution." For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I saw my husband clearly. Not the man who had been choosing his mother over his wife, but the victim of a lifetime of psychological conditioning. "There's something else you need to know," I continued. "I've been building a legal case against your mother for months. Tomorrow morning we have an emergency hearing for a permanent restraining order." "You've been planning this?" "I've been protecting our family. Your mother is dangerous, David, and if you can't see that yet, then we have bigger problems than I thought." David spent the rest of the night reading through my documentation. Police reports from her previous interactions with David's ex-girlfriend, Jessica, expert testimony about parental alienation tactics, financial records showing how she'd tried to position herself as financially necessary to our household. By morning, my husband looked like he'd aged 10 years. "I'm so sorry, Sarah. I can't believe I let her I can't believe I didn't see—" "David, your mother spent 34 years training you to prioritize her needs over everyone else's. Breaking that conditioning isn't going to happen overnight." The emergency hearing was everything I'd hoped for. Judge Hartwell took one look at my evidence folder. 6 months of documentation, expert witness statements, and security footage, and her expression turned granite hard. "Mrs. Martinez," she addressed Helen, who was now represented by a public defender after spending the night in jail, In 20 years on this bench, I have rarely seen such a clear-cut case of grandparent overreach. You have systematically violated this family's boundaries, attempted to undermine parental authority, and culminated your campaign by breaking into their home and attempting to remove an infant. Helen tried to interrupt. Your Honor, if you could just see the evidence of Sarah's mental instability. Mrs. Martinez, you are not an attorney, a psychologist, or a social worker. You have no standing to make determinations about anyone's mental health. What you do have is a criminal record as of last night. The judge granted a 5-year restraining order with supervised visitation only, contingent on Helen completing parenting education classes and psychological evaluation. As we left the courthouse, Helen's mask finally slipped completely. "This isn't over, Sarah," she hissed as her lawyer tried to pull her away. "David will come to his senses. He'll realize what you really are." "What I really am," I replied calmly, "is a mother who protects her child, something you never learned how to be." But winning the legal battle didn't solve everything. In fact, it created new problems I hadn't anticipated. The trauma of realizing how close I'd come to losing Emma, how thoroughly Helen had infiltrated our lives, how easily she'd manipulated David. It changed me in ways I didn't immediately recognize. I became hyper-vigilant about everyone who came near Emma. I started researching the backgrounds of our babysitters, our neighbors, even the pediatrician staff. I installed more security cameras. I created detailed protocols for who could be alone with Emma and under what circumstances. David tried to be understanding, but I could see the concern in his eyes as my behavior became increasingly controlling. "Sarah, the mailman doesn't need a background check. He's been delivering to this neighborhood for 15 years. "How do you know that? How do you know he's really who he says he is?" Because that's not how reality works. We can't live in complete paranoia." But paranoia felt like safety to me. Helen had proven that threats could come from the people closest to us, dressed up as love and concern. How could I trust anyone after that? The breaking point came when David's sister Linda wanted to babysit Emma for an evening so we could have our first date night since the baby was born. "Absolutely not," I told David. "Linda supported your mother for years. How do I know she won't just hand Emma over to Helen the minute we leave?" "Sarah, Linda testified on our behalf at the hearing. She's been completely supportive of the restraining order." "That could be an act. People lie, David. Your whole family lies." David stared at me like I was a stranger. "Sarah, you're starting to sound like what?" "Like my mother. Suspicious of everyone, convinced that people have hidden agendas, unable to trust anyone." The comparison hit me like a physical blow, because deep down I knew he was right. I was becoming the thing I'd fought against. The fear that had protected Emma from Helen was now poisoning everything else in my life. That night, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back at me. When had I become so hard? When had protection turned into isolation? I thought about the families I'd helped as a lawyer, how often I'd seen trauma create new trauma, how victims sometimes became perpetrators of different kinds of harm. Emma deserved better than a mother who saw threats in every shadow. David deserved better than a wife who couldn't distinguish between real danger and anxiety-driven paranoia. And I deserved better than living in a prison of my own making. The next morning, I called my colleague, Rebecca. "I need a referral for a therapist who specializes in family trauma." "Sarah, that's a huge step. I'm proud of you for recognizing." I'm turning into her, Beck. I'm becoming suspicious and controlling and paranoid. I protected Emma from Helen, but now I need to protect her from what this experience has made me. Dr. Sarah Chen specialized in helping people heal from family of origin trauma without perpetuating the cycle. Our first session was brutal. "Sarah, you've been in survival mode for 6 months. Your hypervigilance saved your daughter from a real threat. But now that the threat is neutralized, your nervous system doesn't know how to power down. How do I trust anyone again? How do I know who's safe? You don't. That's the hard truth about healing from betrayal trauma. You have to learn to live with uncertainty while still engaging with life. That sounds impossible. It's not impossible, but it requires rebuilding your sense of safety from the inside out. Right now, you're trying to control your environment to feel safe, but real safety comes from trusting your ability to handle whatever comes. Over the following weeks, Dr. Chen helped me understand how Helen's manipulation had triggered my own childhood trauma. My mother had been emotionally manipulative in different ways, and Helen's behavior had activated those old wounds. You're not just healing from what Helen did, Dr. Chen explained. You're healing from a lifetime of learning that love comes with conditions, that people who claim to care about you will use that care as a weapon. The work was exhausting. Some days I felt like I was rebuilding my entire understanding of relationships from the ground up. But slowly, I started to see the difference between reasonable caution and trauma-driven paranoia. I started allowing Linda to spend supervised time with Emma, then gradually extending those visits. I stopped researching every service provider who came to our house. I learned to sit with the discomfort of not knowing everything about everyone in our lives. Most importantly, I started working on my relationship with David. I need you to understand, I told him during one of our couples therapy sessions, that trusting you again isn't just about forgiving you for siding with your mother. It's about believing that you won't let anyone else manipulate you into betraying our family. I understand that, David replied, and I need you to understand that I'm not the same person who let my mother convince me you were unstable. I'm doing my own work to understand how she conditioned me to doubt myself and everyone she saw as a threat. David had started individual therapy to address his own trauma from growing up with a narcissistic mother. He was learning to recognize manipulation tactics, to trust his own perceptions, to set boundaries with family members. It wasn't easy work for either of us. There were days when I wondered if our marriage could survive the revelation of how deeply Helen's poison had seeped into our foundation. But there were also days when I saw glimpses of who we could become. Two people who had been through hell and chosen to heal instead of perpetuating the damage. The real test came 6 months later, when Helen completed her court-ordered psychological evaluation and parenting classes. "She's requesting supervised visitation with Emma," David told me after speaking with our lawyer. My first instinct was pure panic. Every cell in my body screamed that letting Helen anywhere near Emma was dangerous. But Dr. Chen had prepared me for this moment. What does your wise mind tell you, not your anxious mind? I took a deep breath and considered the facts. Helen had completed the requirements. The visitation would be supervised by a court-appointed professional. Emma was now 9 months old enough that any inappropriate behavior would be immediately obvious. And most importantly, denying reasonable visitation could actually hurt our case if Helen decided to escalate legally. "Okay," I told David, "but I want to be present for the first visit, and I want our lawyer there too." The supervised visit took place at a family services center designed for exactly these situations. Helen looked smaller somehow, diminished by the legal consequences of her actions. As I watched her interact with Emma under the watchful eye of the social worker, I realized something profound. I wasn't afraid of Helen anymore. She was just a broken woman who had never learned how to love without controlling, how to care without consuming. That didn't make her safe. It didn't excuse her behavior, but it did make her manageable. "How are you doing?" the social worker asked me during a break. "Better than I expected. She's not the monster I built up in my mind. She's just sad and limited." "That's a sign of real healing," the social worker replied, "when you can see someone's pathology clearly without being overwhelmed by it." After the visit, Helen approached me hesitantly. "Sarah, I want you to know that I've learned a lot in these classes, about boundaries, about respecting parents' rights." I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or hidden agenda. What I saw instead was genuine uncertainty, maybe even fear. Helen, I appreciate that you've done the work the court required, but rebuilding trust is going to take time. A lot of time. I understand. I hope someday you can forgive me. Forgiveness isn't about you, Helen. It's about me choosing not to carry anger that hurts my family. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean unsupervised access to my daughter. Helen nodded, tears in her eyes. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely remorseful. As David and I drove home with Emma, I felt something I hadn't experienced in over a year: peace. Not the peace of having everything under control, but the peace of knowing I could handle whatever came next. I'm proud of you, David said as we pulled into our driveway. That couldn't have been easy. 6 months ago, I would have seen that visit as Helen trying to manipulate her way back into our lives. Today, I saw a woman who's done some real work on herself and might actually be capable of having a healthy relationship with Emma. Do you think that's possible? A healthy relationship between Emma and my mother? I think it's possible that Helen could earn the right to limited, supervised contact, but that's going to depend on her continued growth, not just completing court-ordered classes. That night, as I put Emma to bed, I thought about the woman I'd become through this experience. I was stronger than I'd been before Helen's campaign against our family, but I was also softer, more compassionate, more aware of how trauma can turn victims into perpetrators. I'd learned to protect without becoming paranoid, to trust without being naive, to forgive without being foolish. Most importantly, I'd learned that being a real mother, Helen's favorite phrase, meant constantly choosing my child's well-being over my own ego, my own fears, my own need for control. Helen had tried to take my daughter by claiming to be a better mother than me. What she'd actually done was teach me how to become the mother Emma deserved, one who could face any threat, survive any betrayal, and still choose love over fear. As I kissed Emma goodnight, I whispered the words I wished someone had said to me as a child. You are safe, you are loved, and you are free to become exactly who you're meant to be. Mama will always protect that freedom, no matter what. That was what real motherhood looked like, and Helen's twisted game had taught me to claim it completely.